All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive,
Right.
for you specifically into this Oppo Find X2 Pro.
Okay.
You sent in this review from rechargemytopup.com,
Right.
and honestly, this phone sounds pretty wild.
Yeah.
Just to start off, it's got a ceramic back.
Oh, wow.
Not glass, ceramic.
It's interesting.
Yeah, so...
We get into that, but...
Yeah, I think what's fascinating about that choice is that it really speaks to Oppo's, desire and focus on creating a phone that feels premium but also lasts.
Right.
The ceramic is incredibly scratch resistant.
Really?
So, even after a couple of years, it should still look pretty sharp.
Okay, so that's the back. What about the front? I mean, that's where you spend most of your time, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The review mentions a massive 6.7-inch AMOLED display
Okay.
with a crisp 1440p resolution.
Wow.
But here's the kicker. It boasts 120 hertz refresh rate.
Hold on, 120 hertz. Does that actually, make a big difference?
Huge. I mean, think of it this way. Everything on the screen feels incredibly smooth.
And responsive.
Yeah.
So, scrolling through web pages feels like silk.
Hmm.
And gaming, forget about choppy frame rates. This thing is buttery smooth.
They also mentioned HDR10 plus, for vibrant colors and a peak brightness of 1200 nits.
Yeah.
So even in direct sunlight, you should be able to see everything clearly.
Exactly. Oppo clearly put a lot of thought into creating a visually stunning experience.
Yeah.
But, a great screen needs some serious power behind it.
So what's under the hood? Can it keep up with all that visual flair?
This phone packs the Snapdragon 865 processor
Okay.
and a whopping 12 GB of RAM.
Wow.
Back in 2020 when it was released.
Yeah.
This was top-tier performance.
12 GB is RAM. I mean, that's more than some laptops. What does that even mean for everyday use?
Imagine this. You're streaming a video, you're browsing the web with multiple tabs open.
Okay.
And you're responding to messages all at the same time.
Yeah.
With this much RAM, the Find X2 Pro can handle it without breaking a sweat.
Really?
No lag, no stutter, just pure performance.
Okay, so it's got the brains and the beauty, but what about capturing those Instagram-worthy moments?
Well, the Find X2 Pro boasts a triple camera setup.
Okay.
You've got a 48MP main camera, a 48MP ultra-wide for those expansive landscape shots, and a 13MP telephoto lens.
I'm assuming that telephoto lens lets you zoom in without getting all those, blurry photos.
You got it. It's optical zoom, not digital zoom.
Right.
So you're maintaining image quality even as you zoom in.
Okay.
Plus, the main camera has optical image stabilization,
Nice.
meaning your photos will be crisp and clear,
Yeah.
even if your hand is a little shaky.
All right, so it can handle multitasking gaming photography. But what about battery life? That's always a concern, especially with these power-hungry features.
It does have a 4260 mAh battery, which is pretty decent for its time.
Decent, but is it enough to last a full day with that 120 hertz display?
That's a valid concern, and it's definitely something you'll want to investigate further in those user reviews you sent in.
Okay.
But there is one thing that might ease your worry.
That's that.
65W fast charging.
Wait, 65 watts? That's crazy fast.
Right. Imagine going from 0% to 100% in under an hour.
Wow.
That's got to be a lifesaver for those days when you're on the go.
I'm starting to see why this phone got such good reviews back in 2020.
Yeah.
It seems like it checks a lot of boxes.
It really does. We haven't even touched on some of the other features.
Like what?
Like the in-display fingerprint sensor, 5G connectivity.
Oh, and did I see it has a headphone jack?
You did.
In this day and age, that's almost a novelty.
You're telling me? While most manufacturers have ditched the headphone jack, Oppo clearly decided to cater to those who still prefer wired audio.
Okay, I'm impressed.
Well,
But let's be real, all this tech must come at a price.
the starting price for the Oppo Find X2 Pro was around $1,000.
Oof, that's a pretty penny.
Mm-hmm.
Even for all those features, was it really worth that much?
Remember, this was a flagship phone competing with the best of the best back in 2020.
Right?
You were getting a premium design, cutting-edge specs, and a top-of-the-line camera system.
Yeah.
But there were some trade-offs. Well, one thing the review pointed out was the lack of a microSD card slot.
So you're stuck with the built-in storage no matter what.
Exactly. That could be a deal breaker for some, especially if you're someone who stores a lot of photos, videos, or downloads tons of apps.
All right, so it's not perfect, but it still sounds pretty amazing for a phone from 2020.
It definitely had its strengths.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, how have those strengths held up over time?
That's a great question. We've talked about the specs, but what about the long-term user experience? Did it live up to the hype?
That's what we'll be digging into next.
Stay tuned. Okay, so we're back and ready to really dive deeper into this whole long-term performance of the Oppo Find X2 Pro.
Yeah.
Because, let's be honest, a phone can have all the bells and whistles at launch.
Right.
But if it doesn't age well,
Exactly.
that's a problem.
It's like buying a shiny new car.
Yeah.
You want to make sure it's still going to be running smoothly a few years down the line.
So what are some of the red flags
Yeah.
to watch out for when it comes to a phone's longevity?
I think software updates are huge.
Okay.
Has Oppo continued to provide updates for the Find X2 Pro?
Right.
You know, keeping the operating system and security features up to date?
Yeah.
That's something you'll want to check.
Okay, what about the battery?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, those things tend to lose their juice over time.
Absolutely. Battery degradation is a natural part of a phone's lifespan.
Right.
But the question is, how has the Find X2 Pro's battery held up over time?
Yeah.
Given its powerful processor and that high refresh rate display, it's possible that battery life could be a concern for some users.
So diving into those user reviews you sent in might reveal some insights into that, real-world battery performance.
Precisely. And while you're at it, take a look at what people are saying about the phone's overall performance after a year or two of use.
Okay.
Does it still feel snappy and responsive, or has it started to slow down?
So software updates, battery life, general performance. Those are the big ones.
Yeah.
Anything else we should be keeping an eye on?
Well, remember how we talked about the Find X2 Pro not having a micro SD card slot?
Right. The fixed storage situation.
Yeah, that could become a bigger issue over time, especially if you're someone who takes a lot of photos and videos, or if you tend to download a lot of apps and games. You might find yourself running out of space sooner than you'd like.
So even though the phone had a decent amount of storage at launch,
Right.
it might not feel so spacious a couple of years down the line.
Exactly. And speaking of the user experience, let's talk a bit about the software. The review mentioned that the Find X2 Pro runs on Android 10 with Oppo's ColorOS 7.1 on top.
I'm not too familiar with ColorOS. Is it any good?
So it's actually had a pretty interesting evolution. In the past, ColorOS was often criticized for being a bit too cluttered.
Okay.
And for mimicking some aspects of Apple's iOS. But with ColorOS 7.1, Oppo really streamlined the interface, making it cleaner and more user-friendly.
So it sounds like they've been listening to user feedback and making improvements.
They have, and user reviews for this version are generally quite positive. People praise its smoothness, its customization options, and its overall aesthetic.
But of course, every user has their own preferences.
Right.
Some people might still prefer a more stock Android experience.
That's true. And luckily, there are plenty of resources online, like YouTube videos and articles, that can give you a good feel for what ColorOS is like in action. You can even find comparisons to other Android UIs.
So it's really about doing your homework and seeing if ColorOS aligns with your personal taste.
Exactly. It's all about finding the right fit.
We've talked a lot about software and performance.
Yeah.
But what about the physical phone itself?
Right.
Does the build quality play a role in how well a phone ages?
Absolutely. The materials and construction of a phone can significantly impact its durability. I mean, think about it. A phone that's prone to scratches and cracks isn't going to age as gracefully as one that's built to last.
And that's where that ceramic back on the Find X2 Pro comes in.
You got to say, ceramic is incredibly durable and scratch resistant. So even if the phone's been through the ringer, the back should still look pretty pristine.
It's like they were thinking ahead, knowing that people would be holding onto their phones for longer.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that sometimes it's worth paying a bit more for a phone that's built with high-quality materials.
So it's not just about the specs on paper.
Right.
It's about those, tangible aspects of build quality and design that contribute to a phone's long-term appeal.
Absolutely. It's about looking at the bigger picture.
You know, it's funny how we often get caught up in the hype of the latest and greatest tech.
Yeah.
But sometimes a phone from a couple of years ago can still be a fantastic option.
I agree. Especially if it was a forward-thinking phone like the Find X2 Pro with features that were ahead of its time.
But as we've discussed, it's important to be aware of the potential downsides and to consider how those might affect your experience down the line.
Exactly. Weigh the pros and cons, do your research, and ultimately make the decision that's right for you.
That's some great advice. Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into the Oppo Find X2 Pro, is there anything else you'd like to add? Okay, so we spent some time now, really unpacking this Oppo Find X2 Pro.
We have.
From its ceramic back and that 120 hertz display.
Right.
To its performance and camera capabilities.
Yeah.
But now let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
It's time to address the elephant in the room.
All right.
The price.
Yeah.
We know that this phone launched at around $1,000.
Uh-huh.
which even back in 2020 was a serious investment.
It was.
So the question is, in 2025, is this phone still worth considering?
That's a good question.
Especially when you've got all these newer phones hitting the market all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's where things get interesting, because we've talked about how this phone was ahead of its time in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Features like that 120 hertz display and the Snapdragon 865 processor are still very relevant today.
So it's not like you're getting outdated technology.
Exactly. And that ceramic back, that's not just a flashy design choice.
Right.
It's a testament to Oppo's commitment to durability. This phone was built to last.
But we also have to acknowledge some of the potential downsides.
Sure.
The lack of expandable storage, for example, could be a deal breaker for some.
Absolutely. And battery life is always a question mark with older phones. It's crucial to check those user reviews and see how the Find X2 Pro's battery has held up over time.
It seems like the decision ultimately comes down to like your own individual needs and priorities.
Exactly. If you prioritize performance display quality and a premium feel, and you're okay with that fixed storage, then the Find X2 Pro might still be a compelling option, especially if you can find it at a good price.
Because let's be honest, the price has probably come down quite a bit since its initial launch.
It most likely has, and that's something you can definitely use to your advantage, Shop around, compare prices from different sellers, and see if you can snag a deal.
That's a great point. Sometimes a little patience and savvy shopping can go a long way.
For sure. Now, before we wrap things up, I wanted to leave our listener with one final thought, We've focused a lot on the tangible aspects of this phone. The specs, the features, the pros and cons.
There's another side to the equation, right?
Exactly. It's the intangible, that feeling you get when you hold the phone in your hand. The smoothness of the display.
Yeah.
The responsiveness of the touchscreen. These are all things that you can't fully grasp from a spec sheet or review.
It's about that personal connection you form with a device.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So if you have the chance, try to experience the Find X2 Pro firsthand. Go to a store, hold it, interact with it, and see if it sparks that intangible sense of delight.
That's a great reminder that tech isn't just about numbers and specs.
Right.
It's about how it makes you feel.
And ultimately, the best tech choices are the ones that align with both your head and your heart.
Well said. I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about the Oppo Find X2 Pro, a phone that even a few years later continues to impress and intrigue.
It really does.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you the knowledge and insights you need to make an informed decision.
Absolutely.
And until next time, keep diving deep.